Friday morning, without fail, a peculiar ritual seemed to unfold on the quiet street of Willowbrook Heights. At first, David Martinez chalked it up to coincidence. A strange crunch echoing in the pre-dawn calm, followed by silence. Then, the unmistakable screech of tires fading into the rising sun. The first time it happened, he dismissed it. The second time, he was suspicious. By the third, he was downright alarmed. David wasn't a paranoid man. 35, practical, recently divorced, he had moved into this sleepy Phoenix suburb hoping for tranquility. An electronics engineer by trade, logic was his sanctuary. He wasn't prone to fantasies or wild speculation, but even logic could only carry a man so far when he consistently woke up to a smashed mailbox. The mailbox itself wasn't anything remarkable. Just a simple, black, regulation-sized box perched atop a wooden post. He had even double-checked the HoA guidelines before installing it. It matched every other mailbox on the street. That made the destruction all the more baffling. After the third incident, David decided enough was enough. He installed a small camera above his garage. Nothing fancy, just a motion-activated unit with night vision and cloud storage. He figured if some reckless teenager was playing mailbox baseball, he'd finally get a glimpse of them. He never expected what the footage would reveal. That Friday morning, as expected, the crunch returned, metal on metal, followed by the scream of rubber tires. David bolted upright, heart racing. He pulled up the footage immediately. There she was, clear as day, a silver Honda Accord, its front bumper crumpling as it smashed directly into his mailbox. The car reversed, its left headlight shattered, steam pouring from the hood. And behind the wheel, David leaned in, stunned, sat Dorene Cartwright, the HoA president. Dorene Cartwright was known throughout the neighborhood as the iron-fisted ruler of Willowbrook Heights. Early 60s, always impeccably dressed in beige slacks and pastel sweaters, she carried herself like the neighborhood was her private kingdom. She quoted community bylaws the way others quoted scripture. Rusty garden. Tools? Violation. Unapproved holiday decorations? Violation. Lawn 2 inches above code? Violation. David had had a few run-ins with Dorene already. Nothing hostile, just the usual passive-aggressive reminders about keeping his garage door closed or trimming the edge of his hedge. Just so. But this, driving her car into his mailbox? This was another level entirely. He watched the video again, stunned at how deliberately she drove into the box. She hadn't swerved. She hadn't braked. She had aimed for it, as if on a mission. The camera captured everything in stunning clarity. License plate, her unmistakable face, even the moment she sat in the driver's seat clutching the wheel and muttering profanities. He turned the volume up and heard her spit. "Stupid damn box! Think you're smarter than me?" David saved the footage in 3 different places, in the cloud, on an external hard drive, and emailed a copy to himself. He wasn't going to lose this. He felt a strange mix of emotions, vindication, disbelief, and something deeper. The sinking realization that this wasn't random. Dorene wasn't just on a power trip. She was waging a personal war, one mailbox at a time. And for some reason, David had become her newest target. The following morning, David called the police. He didn't want to escalate things unnecessarily. But this was beyond HoA harassment. This was vehicular property damage, premeditated and reckless. He wanted it on record. Officer Johnson showed up around 10 a.m., a grizzled man in his late 50s with a clipboard in hand and bags under his eyes. He looked like he'd seen it all and wished he hadn't. David ushered him inside and played the video on his laptop. Johnson watched silently, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. When the footage ended, he scratched his head and muttered, "Well, that's definitely something." David pointed to the screen. "You see the plate? Her face? She drove into it on purpose." "Yeah," Johnson said. "That's definitely criminal property damage. Clear as day." David exhaled. Finally, someone taking it seriously. But just as Johnson reached for his notepad, his radio crackled to life. A domestic disturbance call from across town. Urgent. Johnson excused himself, stepping outside to speak with dispatch. When he returned 5 minutes later, something had shifted in his demeanor. His tone was softer, more dismissive. "Look, Mr. Martinez," he said, closing his notepad. "I've seen cases like this before. These HoA disputes, they get messy. Civil court eats this stuff alive. You're probably better off talking it out with your neighbor." David stared at him, baffled. "She tried to destroy my mailbox. Twice. I have it on video." "You're telling me to talk to her?" Johnson shrugged, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. "It's under the $500 damage threshold. That makes it a civil issue. You could try mediation through your HoA." David laughed bitterly. "You mean the HoA she runs like a one-woman regime?" Johnson didn't respond. He left shortly after, promising to make a note of the incident. David watched him drive away, seething. The following Monday, David received an envelope in the mail bearing the HoA seal. He opened it expecting another fine about grass height or garbage placement. Instead, the letter read, "Dear Mr. Martinez, we have received multiple complaints regarding the installation of unauthorized surveillance equipment on your property. Furthermore, your mailbox appears to exceed the approved dimensions outlined in Section 12, subsection 4, paragraph 9 of the Willowbrook Heights Community Guidelines. You are hereby fined $350 for these violations. Failure to correct these issues within 7 days will result in additional daily penalties of $75. Regards, Dorene Cartwright, HoA President." David stood in his kitchen, rereading the letter in disbelief. She hit my mailbox, and now I'm being fined because it didn't break? It was so audacious, so backwards, he almost laughed. But the rage crept in quickly. She was turning the system against him. Every channel he'd gone through, legal, procedural, had either failed him or been weaponized in her favor. She wasn't just corrupt, she was untouchable. And unless David did something drastic, she'd keep getting away with it. That night, David couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, his mind spinning. Every memory of Dorene's smug little smile, every violation notice, every passive-aggressive note left on his door. The footage of her ramming her car into his mailbox replayed in his head like a looped nightmare. He needed to fight back, but not with anger, with strategy. The next day, David sat at his computer and designed a flyer, simple, black and white, with a bold headline that read, "Missing. Common sense last. Seen in the vicinity of Dorene Cartwright, HoA President." Below that, he included a photo of Dorene from the HoA website, along with this text, "Reward if found." Known to have committed acts of vehicle assault on innocent mailbox unauthorized, HoA fines advanced neighborhood harassment. If you've witnessed similar behavior, call Dorene at her home phone number. Let's help her recover what she's lost. Basic decency. The flyer was satire, but it was also a cry for justice, disguised as a joke. He printed 200 copies and spent the morning distributing them, under windshield wipers, in mailboxes, on bulletin boards at the grocery store, at the park entrance. By noon, his phone began to ring. People were laughing, then venting. Mrs. Patterson, from 3 houses down, shared how Dorene fined her $200 for planting non-compliant red roses. The Johnsons had been fined for having a festive fall doormat that featured pumpkins. Even Bob, his usually unbothered neighbor, confessed he'd been ticketed for having a garden hose coiled the wrong way. By sunset, David had dozens of messages, but one stood out above the rest. It was from Susan Parker, and all she said was, "We need to talk. There are things about Dorene you need to know. things that go way beyond harassment. Susan Parker was a quiet woman, the kind of neighbor who waved from behind her garden fence but rarely lingered in conversation. So when she knocked on David's door that evening, eyes darting like she'd just escaped a crime scene, he knew something serious was about to unfold. She clutched a manila folder to her chest like it was evidence in a murder trial. David let her in, offered her tea, which she politely declined, and sat across from her as she placed the folder on his kitchen table. Her hands trembled slightly. "I've lived here for 23 years, she began, voice low. "I've seen 3 HoA presidents come and go. But Dorene? She's something else entirely. She didn't just take the role. She rewrote the rules." David leaned forward, listening intently. "She wasn't always like this," Susan continued. "At first she was normal, focused, maybe even fair. But after her husband died, something changed. She started citing obscure bylaws, rewriting regulations, and consolidating authority. The HoA board used to have 5 members. She forced 3 of them out with accusations of misconduct. Now she controls every vote." David opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of letters, emails, citations, and violation notices. Most were petty. Bird feeders removed, lawn furniture confiscated, children's sidewalk chalk erased by order. But others were more serious. Documents showing Dorene had access to HoA financials, budgeting power, and even funds used for miscellaneous community improvements with no receipts. "She's been misusing HoA dues," Susan whispered. "And people are too scared to confront her." David stared at the evidence. This is fraud." Susan nodded solemnly. "Yes, but if we go to the HoA board, we're going to Dorene. The board is Dorene. We need a different kind of solution." As if sensing she was under scrutiny, Dorene's campaign against David intensified. Within 2 days of Susan's visit, David received 5 separate HoA violation letters. Improper window curtain color. Apparently, beige was no longer regulation. Hose left in grass. He had left it coiled behind his bush, out of sight. Garage door open longer than 10 minutes. Caught by an HoA patrol vehicle at 8:14 a.m. 4. Inappropriate wind chime sound levels. A ridiculous claim with no decibel proof. Failure to respond to violation notices in a timely manner, even though they had just arrived. And then, the kicker. A $1,200 fine due within 5 business days, or he'd face a lien on his home. David nearly laughed when he opened the last envelope. It was surreal. It felt like war. Except his opponent wasn't a military general or a corporate tycoon. It was a 63-year-old woman with a pastel sweater and a weaponized printer. He called the HoA office. No one answered. He left voicemails. No reply. He emailed. Nothing. That night he heard movement outside his window. He turned off the lights and peeked through the blinds. A black sedan idled across the street. Inside, a silhouette sat motionless. He grabbed his phone and zoomed in with the camera. The window rolled down. And there she was, Dorene Cartwright, sipping from a coffee mug, staring at his house like she was staking out enemy territory. David closed the curtain, his chest pounding. He was being watched. Word of David's flyers and his run-in with Dorene had spread like wildfire. By Saturday, residents were stopping him during his morning jog. Whispers in the park. Sidewalk chats that lingered longer than usual. Everyone had a story, something absurd Dorene had fined them for, some humiliation she had orchestrated. It wasn't just David anymore. The neighborhood was simmering. David hosted a quiet backyard meeting the following Sunday. 22 people showed up, far more than he expected. Susan took the floor first, laying out the evidence. The financial irregularities. The ousted board, members, the surplus funds with no oversight. Then a man named Leonard, who had lived on the block for 30 years, told his story of being fined for having a patriotic flag hung outside of permitted days. Then came Emily, a young mother fined for sidewalk chalk. Then Jorge, who had received a noise violation for playing classical guitar during a barbecue. The stories kept flowing. David listened, stunned. Dorene hadn't just enforced the rules. She had bent, broken, and recreated them at will. And now, the entire community was waking up. "What do we do?" someone finally asked. David stood up. "We fight back, but not with noise, with evidence, with pressure, with public exposure." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. It had begun. Using Susan's documents as a starting point, David spent the next week digging. He scoured HoA public records, accessed meeting transcripts, and filed a request through the Arizona Homeowners Protection Act to review HoA budget allocations. The deeper he went, the darker it got. Dorene had approved $14,000 for community art installations, no evidence of where it went. $6,500 for seasonal landscaping, despite the fact that landscaping was outsourced and covered under a separate budget. $3,200 for private consultant review, a vague term with no report or receipt. And then he found it, a $5,000 expense labeled security upgrades. But there had been no new cameras, no neighborhood watch expansion. David traced the payment to a company called Pinnacle Safe Property Services. He searched the business license. The owner's name? Thomas Cartwright, Dorene's late husband. Except, Thomas had been dead for 3 years. The company was a shell. She was funneling HoA dues into a fake business and pocketing the money. David documented everything: screenshots, bank transfers, budget reports. It was airtight. The next step wasn't just retaliation, it was justice. David knew one thing: exposing Dorene wouldn't be easy. She had power, connections, and the kind of ruthless control that left people paralyzed with fear. But she had one weakness: pride. She believed she was untouchable, that no one would ever fight back. David's plan was threefold. File a report with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which regulated HOAs under state law. With the financial evidence in hand, he could initiate an official audit. Launch a digital petition to demand a vote of no confidence in Dorene's leadership. HOA bylaws required 40% of the community to call for a special election. With the growing unrest, he was confident he could get it. Present the story to the local news. With video footage of Dorene's vehicular mailbox assault, financial corruption, and testimony from over a dozen neighbors, it would make for a compelling exposé. He sent the documents to the Department of Real Estate under a formal complaint. He set up a change.org petition and shared it via email and Nextdoor. Then he contacted Channel 9's Watchdog Wednesday segment. By Friday, the petition had 114 signatures. By Saturday, Channel 9 replied. Subject: RE. HOA investigation. This is compelling. Can we schedule an on-camera interview? David smiled. Dorene had declared war on the wrong man. Morning, David stood outside his home in a crisp button-up shirt, his documents neatly arranged in a folder. A white van with the Channel 9 News logo pulled into his driveway. Out stepped Janelle Reyes, the award-winning investigative reporter known for toppling corrupt city council members and exposing crooked school boards. She shook David's hand firmly. "Let's get this on camera." With 2 cameras rolling, David laid it all out. The mailbox destruction, the barrage of citations, the financial records, the shell company, and most importantly, the human cost. The neighbors who had lived in fear, been fined into silence, and lost their sense of peace. Janelle's eyes widened at the depth of the corruption. "You're telling me the HOA president fined you for curtain colors? But used HOA funds to pay a company registered to her deceased husband? She asked. On camera. David nodded. That's correct. She's turned this community into a personal fiefdom. And no one stopped her because everyone was afraid. Behind the camera, neighbors gathered to watch. Susan, Leonard, Emily, even Mr. Tran from down the street, who hadn't spoken to anyone in months, stood silently, bearing witness. Some clapped after David's statement. Others whispered prayers of gratitude. By the time the crew wrapped, Janelle leaned in and whispered, "This is going to air next Wednesday. Be ready." David felt a weight lift, not just from his shoulders, from the entire neighborhood. The calm didn't last long. On Thursday morning, just 2 days after the interview, David received a notice of HOA foreclosure proceedings. According to the letter, he had failed to comply with accumulated fines totaling $6,800, an absurd number manufactured overnight. Attached was a court summons. Dorene was suing to seize his home. David stared at the notice, stunned. She wasn't just retaliating. She was escalating to nuclear war. Within hours, 2 other neighbors received similar letters, Jorge and Emily, both of whom had attended David's meeting and signed the petition. It was clear. Dorene was attempting to destroy the rebellion before it could crest. David called an attorney, Marissa Vaughn, a specialist in HOA litigation. She reviewed the documents, then looked at David over her glasses and said, "This woman is dangerous. But she's sloppy." He handed her the folder Susan had given him. She smiled as she flipped through it. "Oh, she messed up," Marissa said. "Big time. If we act quickly, we can file an injunction to freeze her authority. But we'll need a judge willing to take emergency action." David nodded. She picked the wrong engineer to pick a fight with. 1 week later, in a small courtroom downtown, Dorene Cartwright sat with her arms crossed, lips pursed so tightly they looked bloodless. She was dressed in her usual baby blue blouse and had brought 2 legal aides from the HOA's contracted firm. David, flanked by Marissa Vaughn and a team of neighbors, took the stand. So did Susan. Then Leonard. Then Jorge. Each recounted a story: fines for invisible infractions, threats of foreclosure, unexplained financial deductions from HOA dues. Marissa presented the budget records, the payments to Pinnacle Safe Property, services, and proof the company's registered agent was Thomas Cartwright. Deceased since 2022, Dorene tried to object. She claimed everything was standard practice. She insisted that the homeowners were simply anti-authority radicals who disliked order. But when the judge reviewed the financial trail, he leaned forward, tapping the documents. "Mrs. Cartwright, this is fraud. You approved payments to a non-operating entity. You issued illegal fines without board approval. And you pursued foreclosure actions without notifying the members." Dorene's mouth opened, then closed. "I hereby issue an injunction," the judge continued. "Effective immediately, Dorene Cartwright is suspended from all HOA duties pending a full state investigation. All fines levied against these residents are vacated. Foreclosure actions are nullified." A stunned silence swept the room. Then someone clapped. Then another. Then the entire courtroom erupted in cheers. David turned to see Susan crying softly. They had done it. That night, at 7 p.m. sharp, families gathered in their living rooms, popcorn, bowls full, hearts pounding. The headline filled the screen. HOA Tyrant. The Cartwright Scandal. Special investigation by Janelle Reyes. Footage played of David speaking into the camera, of neighbors revealing their stories, of Janelle confronting Dorene in her driveway after the court ruling. Dorene tried to slam the door, but not before whispering, "This neighborhood was ungrateful anyway." Janelle's narration cut through. What happens when a single person seizes control of a neighborhood government? What if the very institution meant to protect becomes a weapon? In Whispering Pines, Arizona, one engineer said, "Enough." They aired the mailbox footage. They showed side-by-side screenshots of the fake company. They even played a voice message. Dorene left on Jorge's answering machine. "You step out of line again, and I will bury you in legal fees." The piece ended with David standing before a small crowd in the park, saying, "We don't need tyrants in our communities. We need neighbors. We need trust." The screen faded to black. Over 14,000 people commented online that night. Other communities began sharing similar stories. Whispering Pines had sparked something bigger than itself. The next HoA election was held 3 weeks later, under supervision, by a third-party mediator from the state. Dorene didn't attend. She had resigned via a single, cold email. "I no longer wish to participate in a community that does not appreciate order. You'll regret this." No one responded. David, Susan, Jorge, and Leonard were all elected to the new board. Their first act? Erase all unpaid fines from the previous administration. Open the HoA budget to public viewing online. Pass a homeowner's bill of rights, ensuring no one could ever wield unilateral power again. The mailbox was finally replaced with a reinforced steel one, but David didn't need it anymore. Every morning, a neighbor would stop by with his mail in hand, already picked up from the community box. Kids played freely again. Sidewalk chalk returned in bursts of color. Wind chimes sang. The silence of fear was gone. One night, as David sat on his porch sipping coffee, Susan walked by with her corgi, Max. "We did it," she said simply. David nodded. "We reclaimed our home." They both stared down the quiet street of Whispering Pines, no longer under siege, but finally home.